How y'all doing? Cannabis of history. Moving on to the next part. And yeah, what is it? I don't even know. Part 13, I think, maybe. Shoot, we'll see. I'll get it right on the description. Alrighty. Let's go. Let's start right where we left off. It's right there. Okay. Visiting a local bookshop several months after graduating, Ludlow picked up a copy of the September 1856 edition of Putnam's Monthly Magazine containing Bayard Taylor's article. Refer back to another part about him. Reading the piece, Ludlow was filled with hope. For the first time, quote, for the first time in all the tremendous stretch of my spellbound eternity, he later wrote, heard I the voice of sympathy, or saw I an exemplar of escape. He immediately wrote to the magazine and was put in touch with Taylor, from whom he asked help to break his addiction. Taylor replied, offering encouragement. Ludlow did not immediately abandon hashish, but he heeded all Taylor said, and a literary friendship commenced. Now a graduate, Ludlow wanted to find employment, preferably in a job that would give him ample opportunity to read and write. He also hoped that whatever he did might remove the temptation to continue taking hashish. Teaching seemed apposite, so he applied for and was appointed to the position of classics teacher at Watertown Academy, a college preparatory school on the eastern shore of Lake Ontario in upstate New York. A month after taking up the post, he was published professionally for the first time. A poem entitled To the Lady with the Black Sail appeared in a magazine called The Knickerbocker. Rich in drug imagery, it is a dark and brooding piece, the first verse of which reads, quote, as night the rosy bosomed hills unfolding softens their traces in his weird embrace, so more ethereal grew the matchless molding of thy pure earnest spiritual face, most pensive maid, beneath the shade of that strange veil of melancholy lace. Close quote. Regardless of this success in his new life as a schoolmaster, Ludlow still found he occasionally craved hashish and attempted to sublimate it with tobacco and, bizarrely, by blowing soap bubbles. The colors swirling on them reminding him of the marbling hues of his hashish hallucinations. At Taylor's suggestion, he also wrote down as many details as he could recall of his hashish dreams. Intended primarily as an exercise in catharsis, these were soon shaped by Ludlow into an article that was printed in the December 1856 edition of Putnam's Monthly Magazine, headed The Apocalypse of Hashish. It was understandably published anonymously and broadly addressed the philosophy of hashish. It was Ludlow's premise that Pythagoras, the ancient Greek philosopher and mathematician, had used hashish with the members of his mystical brotherhood at Crotona. At the end of his first term at Watertown, Ludlow was finding teaching not as he had anticipated. His responsibilities gave him little time to himself, and the workload was grinding him down. Resigning his position, he returned to Poughkeepsie, determined to seek treatment for his continuing hashish craving. For a while, he tried to combat it with laudanum, but soon gave this up. Good. Fearful of its potential for addiction. Yeah. He saw no value in giving up one longing for another. Next, he tried alcohol, but deemed it as pernicious as opium. Taking Taylor's advice, he settled down to concentrate instead on writing up the full story of his ensnarement by hashish. For 4 months, he worked constantly on what was to end up as a 365-page manuscript. When it was done, Ludlow submitted it for publication to Harper Brothers in New York, one of the most prestigious publishers in the country. With virtually no revisions, it was accepted for publication on July 1st, 1857, entitled The Hashish Eater, Being Passages from the Life of a Pythagorean. It went on sale that November. November, priced at $1. $1 for 1857. Pricey, I think, there. But there you go. A simultaneous publication was released in London by Sampson Low and Son, to whom Harper Brothers had sold the European rights. The authorship was not attributed. By referring to himself as a Pythagorean, Ludlow intended it to be understood that he believed in the principle of metempsychosis and considered himself, like the mystical followers of the Greek philosopher, an outcast because of his convictions. It was his opinion that hashish was good for both body and soul. As the title implied, the book was autobiographical, narrating Ludlow's hashish experiences in chronological sequence, interspersed with lengthy comments on lessons learnt along the way. These included his opinion that hashish proved the existence of the soul, and that there was a scientifically substantiated unity to all the senses, which are in effect natural forces governed by a single law. His synesthetic experiences, whilst under the influence of hashish, verified this theory. In the final chapter, Ludlow justified the attraction of drugs to men of ideas and genius. He demanded that society be, quote, kinder in our judgment of the man who runs to narcotics and other stimulants for relief, close quote. What Ludlow had set out to do was to write a polemic about hashish, just as Thomas de Quincey had about opium in his Confessions of an English Opium Eater. That he had read and was much influenced by De Quincey and possibly Théophile Gautier as well is indisputable, although he lacked their more mature literary artifice and stylistic confidence. Graphically describing the misery of the user, Ludlow stressed how what was initially a transport to paradise became a terrible snare, which in turn led to a deeper understanding of oneself. The implication was that the rigors, no matter how horrendous, were ultimately a worthwhile price to pay. At the same time, however, one senses he knew he was addressing an audience with its mind already set, a society bound by parochial Protestant ethics, which frowned upon alcohol and condemned any impious excess, was never going to endorse cannabis. The book was prominently reviewed in the November issue of Harper's Monthly Magazine. The reviewer, bearing in mind he was writing in the publisher's own journal, was hardly going to be too condemnatory, but his comments were not entirely laudatory. Quotes, unequal to De Quincey, says, in literary culture and in the craft of bookmaking, the author of this work compares favorably with him, excuse me, compares favorably with him in the passion for philosophical reflection, in the frankness of his personal revelations, and in preternatural brilliancy of fancy. Close quote. Yet there was more to the review than mere criticism. It aroused considerable public interest, being one of the trend-setting publications of its day. Harper's Monthly Magazine reached many influential readers and was taken seriously. You gotta remember, folks, 1850s here, 1857. The magazines, the newspapers, everything was, yeah, that was media. That was the media. Okay. That was just right. I mean, there was telegraphs. Yeah, there was telegraphs by that point, but they were used as a communication device, not really as a way to transfer knowledge, media. So everything was, magazines were the thing, and newspapers. So periodicals, there was the daily. You had a daily wherever you were. That was more local. Then you had a weekly, and then a monthly. There might even been had a bi-weekly at that point. So you had kind of and different like sizes. So you'd have your local, and then a bigger one, and maybe the whole state, or then the region, and then the whole country. You know what I mean? So, and there was a little bit of each and every one, and that was the media. It's hard to get our minds around that, but and then like pictures in there, drawings. It would be like, stencils, you know, freehand drawings. There's satire. So there's cartoons that started in those at that time. All that, okay. The comics, all that. So, yeah. It reached many influential readers and was taken seriously. Other reviews followed, which considerably swelled Ludlow's literary career. Almost every reviewer followed the original critic's line, comparing hashish to opium and Ludlow to De Quincey. The book, which ran to a number of editions, both in America and Great Britain, brought Ludlow overnight fame and established his reputation as a writer. Falling out with his father, who could not accept his son's involvement with hashish, Ludlow left Poughkeepsie in 1858 for New York, where, through a family acquaintance, he was employed as an assistant to a lawyer under whom it was intended he should also study law. His ambitions, however, were literary, and he began regularly to visit Pfaff's restaurant at 647 Broadway, also known as Pfaff's Cave. It was a watering hole for the city's up-and-coming actors, writers, journalists, and poets who met there to eat, drink, and talk. Their circle became known as the Bohemians. 1858. Okay. Here, amongst these dissolute, hard-drinking, hard-living literati, Ludlow found his intellectual level. Amongst the group was Walt Whitman, later to be one of America's most outstanding poets. Let's see, Ludlow and Whitman knew each other. Isn't that cool? Resigning from what amounted to a legal apprenticeship, Ludlow turned his hand to freelance journalism, but always in poor health, he was forced to leave New York to convalesce from a bout of pneumonia in a health resort on the Catskill Mountains. There, He met an 18-year-old girl called Rosalie Osborne. Despite her parents' misgivings, they were married at Waterville on June 15th, 1859. His health again failed, and shortly after the wedding, they moved for a while to Florida, where the climate would ease his repeated bronchial illness. The following year, Ludlow's first novel was serialized in the recently founded Harper's Weekly magazine, and The Hashish Eater was reprinted. Continuing to write prolifically, he turned his hand to travel writing, critical journalism, poetry, scientific commentary, and even playwriting. His stage adaptation of Cinderella was penned to raise money for the treatment of those wounded in the U.S. Civil War. Yet his main forte lay in romantic, stereotyped fiction and short stories. His writing might have brought him increasing fame, but it was not very lucrative, and he accepted an editorial position on the New York Evening Post and a clerical job at the New York Customs House, checking the manifests of incoming vessels. By 1863, his health failing and his financial worries continuing, Ludlow decided he had to leave New York, if possible, for good. The most obvious direction in which to head was west. Amongst Ludlow's friends from Pfaff's Cave was an artist called Albert Bierstadt. His reputation growing, a number of his rich patrons financed a painting trip across the continent. Bierstadt, I think it was Bierstadt, whatever, how you say, invited Ludlow to document the journey. He accepted, was awarded a commission from the Smithsonian Institution and the New York Evening Post to write his chronicle for publication, and they set off, traveling by railroad and stagecoach. That's cool. So you had an artist, up and coming and already kind of famous artist, inviting Ludlow, a writer, now famous writer, to go with him on this journey across the continent. Just when Ludlow was kind of wanting to go west, right? That's pretty cool. Oh, yeah, there they went. Traveling by railroad and stagecoach. You see, you gotta remember, it's 1860s. I think we're at 1863 now. Not during the Civil War, but other things were happening, folks. It wasn't just the Civil War happening. Other things. The trains, a lot of the trains, most of the trains, were running still. You know, going out west, and a lot of stuff was happening out west that had nothing to do with the battles and the Civil War. So I mean, you got to kind of expand out your conception of a time period sometimes, and realize, oh, that you could live a whole life right in that period and not have anything to do with the main thing that we remember that period for. Okay. It's just how it goes sometimes. So, of course, he knew that was happening over there. But, all right, let me get back. So there they went, okay? En route, they hunted bison. So Bierstadt and Ludlow, they hunted bison, met Brand. And what's funny is Bierstadt is funded by someone else that paid for all this. That's great. That's the best way to travel, right? If you could do it. En route, they hunted bison, met Brigham Young and Mark Twain, descended into a gold mine in a spoil bucket, visited an opium den in San Francisco, and camped in Yosemite, carving their names and the date on a rock. That's cool. I wonder if you can find it still. Reaching Oregon, Ludlow fell ill with the onset of tuberculosis and returned to New York by sea via Cuba. Oh my goodness. Okay, he went all the way around. I don't even know. Anyway, he got back. Ludlow's yeah. Ludlow's articles on this odyssey greatly enhanced his reputation and made him a darling of New York society. For Bierstadt, his paintings made him a millionaire. Yet the trip had done Ludlow great harm. Behind his back, the artist had been conducting an affair with his wife. That's why he invited him in the first place. That asshole. Bierstadt. Isn't that something? Wow. Isn't that something? She and Ludlow separated, and he quickly went downhill. No wonder, man. That's a betrayal, because him and Bierstadt were probably good best friends. They traveled all over, done all these amazing things together, and then all the while he was secretly, uh, his, Ludlow's wife was being with Bierstadt behind Ludlow's back. What a shame. And so he went downhill after he left her. Or they separated. He quickly went downhill, drinking heavily and possibly eating hashish again, which he had abjured for some time. His work suffered, his editors rejected his submissions, and he became all but destitute. With considerable self-determination, he pulled himself together and started to publish again. In 1866, he and his wife divorced. Well, they made it official then. In less than 6 months, she married Bierstadt. That's something. Ludlow then remarried the widow of a judge and continued to write. He remarried the widow of a judge. Okay. One of his projects, written for Harper's Monthly magazine, was an article on opium addiction, which subject he had been studying for some time, working with opium addicts. In October 1868, he contributed to a book entitled The Opium Habit, in which he promoted a cannabis extract as a medicine to help overcome opium withdrawal symptoms. That's cool. All the while, he worked upon his notes of his transcontinental journey, which were the foundation for his book, The Heart of the Continent, published in 1870. Oh, I'd love a copy of that. I need to underline that and go try to find that one. Or at least the reprint, Throughout the text, he was meticulous in omitting any reference to Bierstadt. So he deleted him out of his writing, of his experience, The Heart of the Continent. It's kind of a shame that altered what the book would have been if it wasn't for that betrayal. But he did that, so he changed it and left Bierstadt out of it. Isn't that something? Ludlow's health continued to decline, and eventually his family decided to take him to Switzerland, then famous as a center for the treatment of tuberculosis. He died in a house on the banks of Lake Geneva on September 12th, 1870, the day after his 36th birthday. 5 years later, his remains were returned to Poughkeepsie to be interred in the family grave plot. At his death, Fitzhugh Ludlow's estate was worth less than $100. Although The Hashish Eater went out of print soon after Ludlow's death, it had a lasting legacy. Through Ludlow's fertile imagination, his detailed descriptions of his hashish experiences, and his statement that he was addicted to it, hashish, a comparatively mild narcotic, came to be regarded as akin to the much more powerful and dangerously addictive opium. A misconception that has persisted to the present day. End of chapter 8. Right there. Okay. Chapter 9. All of a sudden already. Isn't that something? Oh, the title of chapter 9 is Cannabis RX. Okay. Let me get a drink real quick. I'll be right back. I'm just going to pause it. Alrighty. Back on. So, Cannabis RX. Chapter 9. In the second half of the 18th century, cannabis started to appear in dispensatories, textbooks referred to by pharmacists and physicians in much the same way as modern chemists or doctors might consult the British National Formulary or the U.S. National Library of Medicine, Medline website. It was most often recommended as an antibiotic and analgesic, the same applications as were suggested by folk remedies. This situation, however, was to change in the first half of the 19th century. Word started to filter out of India about a wonder drug derived from hemp. One of its main exponents was an Irish doctor by the name of William Brooke O'Shaughnessy. I think is how you say it. William Brooke O'Shaughnessy, I think. Born into a staunchly Roman Catholic family in Limerick, he attended the University of Edinburgh, from the medical school of which he graduated in 1830. 3 years later, at the age of 24, he went out to work for the East India Company, being appointed assistant surgeon in Bengal, and professor of chemistry at the Medical College in Calcutta. From the very start of his employ, he realized the therapeutic potential for hashish, and after a period of intensive study of Oriental texts on the matter and talking to native doctors and scholars as far away as Tehran, Kabul, and Kandahar, I think it means, spelled different, Kabul and Kandahar, yeah. He started using animals to investigate it scientifically, especially dogs, of which there was, as he put it, an overabundant superfluity in the streets of the city. So she's dogs experiment on. Not surprisingly, he found hashish affected canines much as it did humans. A dog given 10 grains of hemp, O'Shaughnessy recorded, became stupid and sleepy. He said, quotes, became stupid and sleepy, using his words, dozing at intervals, starting up, wagging his tail, as if extremely contented. He ate some food greedily. On being called to, he staggered to and fro, and his face assumed a look of utter and helpless drunkenness. These symptoms lasted about 2 hours, and then gradually passed away. Close quote. Seeing the dog suffered no lasting effects, he then tried it on human patients. He's jumped right in, huh? Okay. Concentrating on those with rheumatism, tetanus, cholera, and epilepsy. Whilst the hashish did not offer a cure, it did prove to be an effective and valuable analgesic and sedative. It also, he reported, improved the libido. Encouraged by this, O'Shaughnessy also dosed a rabies sufferer with 2 grains of hemp resin an hour. Inevitably, for there was no known cure for rabies at the time, the patient died, but O'Shaughnessy noted it seemed, quote, evident that at least one advantage was gained from the use of the remedy. The awful malady was stripped of its horrors. If not less fatal than before, it was reduced to less than the scale of suffering which precedes death from most ordinary diseases. Close quote. The patient even took some damp rice, sugar cane, and fruit juice. This was a remarkable achievement for a rabid person suffers acutely from hydrophobia and intense fear of water. See, so they usually don't drink anything, have a fear of it. But this person, it helped them that way. Wow. 6 years after arriving in India, an interesting guy here, O'Shaughnessy presented the first medical paper. So he's in India now. He presented the first medical paper in the modern sense, of the research being objective and scientifically collated to the Medical and Physical Society of Bengal. It was entitled On the Preparation of the Indian Hemp, or Gunja, Cannabis indica, the effects on the animal system in health, and their utility in the treatment of tetanus and other convulsive diseases. That's the title. He was aided in his research by several medical colleagues and his brother Richard, who was also a doctor practicing in Bengal. After discussing the history of cannabis and his mostly primary sources, O'Shaughnessy went into detail on his experimentation with animals and then gave case studies of patient trials determining that hashish was, quote, an anticonvulsive remedy of the greatest value, close quote. His paper, however, was to do more than medicinally promote hashish. It was also to dispel myths and provide succinct accounts of its use by native peoples. An avid scientific observer, he even went so far as to explain why hashish was greenish in color, it contained chlorophyll, and to describe at length the method of making majoon. And that's Majoon. So I think you say it majoon or majoon. I don't know if it's a soft J or a hard J. Anyway, the majoon, that's all is that, or hemp confection, is a compound of. Now this is his quotes. Okay, all of this is from his scientific observations right here. Okay, quotes. The majoon or hemp confection is a compound of sugar, butter, flour, milk, and sidi or bang. The process has been repeatedly performed before me by Amir, the proprietor of a celebrated place of resort for hemp devotees in Calcutta, and who is considered the best artist in his profession. 4 ounces of sidi, Sidhee, and an equal quantity of ghee, Ghee, are placed in an earthen or well-tinned vessel, a pint of water added, and the whole of it warmed over a charcoal fire. The mixture is constantly stirred until the water all boils away, which is known by the crackling noise of the melted butter on the sides of the vessel. The mixture is then removed from the fire, squeezed through cloth while hot, by which an oleaginous solution of the active principles and coloring matter of the hemp is obtained, and the leaves, fibers, and etc. remaining on the cloth are thrown away. The green oily solution soon concretes into a buttery mass and is then well washed by the hand with soft water, so long as the water becomes colored. The coloring matter and an extractive substance are thus removed, and a very pale green mass of the consistence of simple ointment remains. The washings are thrown away. Amir says that these are intoxicating and produce constriction of the throat, great pain, and very disagreeable and dangerous symptoms. The operator then takes 2 pounds of sugar and, adding a little water, places it in a pipkin over the fire. When the sugar dissolves and froths, 2 ounces of milk are added. A thick scum rises and is removed. More milk and a little water are added from time to time, and the boiling continued about an hour, the solution being carefully stirred until it becomes an adhesive, clear syrup, ready to solidify on a cold surface. 4 ounces of tyre, Tyre, which is new milk dried before the sun, in fine powder, are now stirred in. And lastly, the prepared butter of hemp is introduced. Brisk stirring being continued for a few minutes. A few drops of attar of roses are then quickly sprinkled in, and the mixture poured from the pipkin on a flat cold dish or slab. The mass concretes immediately into a thin cake, which is divided into small lozenge-shaped pieces. A seer thus prepared sells for 4 rupees. 1 drachm by weight will intoxicate a beginner. 3 drachms, one experienced in its use. The taste is sweet and the odor very agreeable. He added that, going on, Amir states that there are 7 or 8 Majun makers in Calcutta, that sometimes, by special order of customers, he introduces stramonium seeds, but never nux vomica, that all classes of persons, including the lower Portuguese or Cala Ferengues, and especially their females, consume the drug. That it is most fascinating in its effects, producing ecstatic happiness, a persuasion of high rank, a sensation of flying, voracious appetite, and intense aphrodisiac desire. He denies that its continued use leads to madness, impotence, or to the numerous evil consequences described by the Arabic and Persian physicians. Although I disbelieve Amir's statements on this point, his description of the immediate effect of Majun is strictly and accurately correct. They were out of that section of his writings. Visiting England in 1842, O'Shaughnessy gave some hashish to a London pharmacist called Peter Squire, who owned a chemist shop in Oxford, it was 1842, in Oxford Street, requesting that he make a medicinal extract from it. Squire duly made the first recorded extract of hashish in alcohol, patented it as Squire's extract, and put it on the market as an analgesic. Other pharmacists took it up and sold it under different names, including the famous James Smith of Edinburgh. It was his extract, made under license in America as Tilden's extract, that Ludlow discovered in Anderson's shop in Poughkeepsie a decade later. Ironically, O'Shaughnessy is not best remembered for his medical work on cannabis. His place in the annals of medical history is assured by his invention of intravenous electrolyte therapy, rehydrating the body with a steady drip of saline, which he completed even before going to India. His major achievement in life, however, had nothing whatsoever to do with medicine. Fascinated by the electric telegraph, he published a paper on its potential at more or less the same time as he presented that on cannabis. It was ignored for 8 years, until the Governor General of India, Lord Dalhousie, appointed him Director General of Telegraphs. In this post, he oversaw the building of India's first telegraph network, being knighted for his work in 1856. changing his name by royal license to William O'Shaughnessy Brooke. He retired and abjured all interest in medicine, dying in the seaside resort of Southsea in Hampshire at the age of 80 in 1889. While Squire was almost certainly the first person to manufacture a medicinal tincture of cannabis, he was by no means the only pharmacologist experimenting with and investigating cannabis. The work encouraged by the recent successes in isolating morphine, nicotine, and caffeine. All these substances, however, were alkaloids, but as cannabis contains no active alkaloidal compounds, and it was these for which the searchers were hunting, little progress was made. Squire's extract. So you see how different it is. There's no alkaloid. And all those others do have them. Anyway, Squire's extract medicines like it quickly became widely used. Doctors were keen to prescribe them because the only other effective painkiller they could offer was highly addictive opium. And it was soon realized cannabis-based extracts were not physically addictive. Furthermore, opium was expensive and produced side effects such as chronic constipation, a lowering of respiratory and heart rates, excessive pruritus, which is itching, and loss of appetite. Cannabis appeared to have no adverse side effects whatsoever other than feelings of euphoria, drowsiness, and hallucinations. I'd say mild hallucination, if you could even call them that. By 1850, it was listed in a number of British and European pharmacopoeias and was that year included in the United States Pharmacopoeia, with its application being appropriate for the treatment of neuralgia, tetanus, typhus, cholera, rabies, dysentery, alcoholism, and opiate addiction, anthrax, leprosy, incontinence, snakebite, gout, virtually any disease that induced convulsions, tonsillitis, insanity, menorrhagia, which is excessive menstrual bleeding, and uterine hemorrhaging. This new drug gained much credibility when it was widely rumored that even Queen Victoria had been prescribed it by her physician in ordinary, Sir John Russell Reynolds, who gave it to her to relieve menstrual cramps. But no documentary proof of this has yet come to light. Well, I don't. Just because there's no proof of that doesn't mean that that's not what it was. Because I've heard that so many times from so many sources that Queen Victoria, she was her doctor, So no proof. Yeah, you're not going to get proof of that because that was a very private matter. Come on, Queen Victoria. There's not going to be anybody, a scribe or recorder or writer anywhere that's going to write that down, folks. Get your head cut off or something. You don't do that. That's just out of the question. You just would never, ever. That was just something you don't talk about back then, especially in Victorian society and all that. No wonder we don't have evidence for it, but we pretty much know for sure, without having like a recorded evidence of it, that she definitely was prescribed that and benefited from it for years of her life, many years, many years, maybe most of her adult life. Okay, all right then, all right. During the second half of the 19th century, scores of research projects were conducted upon and papers published concerning cannabis, doctors becoming extremely knowledgeable about the drug. Even before O'Shaughnessy presented his first paper on cannabis, the American Provers Union, the professional body of North American homeopathists, published an article on it in its journal in 1839. 7 years later, the editor of the American Journal of Insanity, Dr. Amariah Brigham, reviewed Moreau's work and, acquiring some hashish from Calcutta, ran trials on some inmates of a lunatic asylum at Utica in upstate New York. In 1860, the Ohio State Medical Society's Committee on Cannabis Indica reported on the efficacy of cannabis in treating stomach cramps, coughs, venereal disease, and childbirth psychosis, now known as postnatal depression. Many other treatises followed, some more scientifically sound than others. Yet, as the years passed, the research became more exacting and specific, meeting higher scientific criteria. I mean, people, we're talking all about the 1800s here, folks. Yeah. In 1889, an article by Dr. E.A. Birch in the Lancet, then as now one of the world's leading medical journals, okay, yeah, I've heard of it, outlined the application of cannabis for the treatment of opium and chloral hydrate withdrawal symptoms. The mixture reduced the opium craving and acted as an antiemetic. The following year, an article appeared in the same publication by Queen Victoria's Dr. Reynolds. He declared cannabis, quote, one of the most valuable medicines we possess, and ideal for treating uterine bleeding, migraine, neuralgia, and epileptoid and chorioid spasms. He was not so sure of its use in cases of asthma, depression, and delirium treatments, and declared it of no benefit in instances of joint pain and epilepsy. He was wrong about that. On both of those. Anyway, those researchers, but you can see how thorough. I mean, this is major stuff here. Those researchers not concerned with the purely medical application of cannabis addressed the reasons for its efficacy. An American, Hobart Amory Hare, Hobart Amory Hare, suggested in 1887 he had found a reason for the analgesic properties of cannabis. During the time that this remarkable drug is relieving pain, a very curious physical condition manifests itself. Namely, that the diminution of the pain seems to be due to its fading away in the distance, so that the pain becomes less and less, just as the pain in a delicate ear would grow less and less as a beaten drum was carried farther and farther out of the range of hearing. This condition is probably associated with the other well-known symptom produced by the drug, namely the prolongation of time. He also noted how cannabis calmed the anxiety felt by sufferers of terminal illnesses. Not all the researchers, however, were necessarily as keen to discover a strictly medical relevance. The foremost English pharmacologist and author of the immensely influential A Manual of Pharmacology, Walter Ernest Dixon, wrote in the British Medical Journey that hemp taken as an inhalation may be placed in the same category as coffee, tea, and cola. It is not dangerous, and its effects are never alarming, and I have come to regard it in this form as a useful and refreshing stimulant and food accessory, and one whose use does not lead to a habit which grows upon its votary. Close quote. For many in the latter half of the 19th century, cannabis and laudanum were as readily available as stimulants as coffee, tea, or Coca-Cola are today. What was more, they were cheaper than brandy, gin, whiskey, or tobacco, and could be purchased freely from any pharmacist or even grocery store without prescription. Yeah, those were the days, huh? For the poor who could not afford a doctor's fees, cannabis was a boon. Whereas for the middle classes, especially women in Britain, who considered alcohol to be masculine and working class, it was an acceptable tonic when taken as a proprietary or patent medicine. Yet, despite its cheapness and availability, cannabis never caught on as much as the opiates, which were the drugs of choice, because it did not have an immediate effect. What was more, opium was considered respectable and widely available as laudanum or morphine in Batley's sedative solution, or the baby calming gripe Waters Godfrey's cordial, and Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, to mention but a few. Wow. When cannabis was sold, it was in tincture form. Here we go, tinctures. One of the most famous British patent medicines of them all, Dr. J. Collis Brown's chlorodyne, contained morphine, chloroform, and tincture of cannabis. Well, he just threw all of them in there, didn't he? They're gone. Chloroform? Really? Invented by an Indian army doctor as a palliative for cholera victims. It was sold as a highly effective cure for diarrhea. It may still be bought today in Britain without prescription. Needless to say, it no longer contains cannabis and the morphine content. Originally 2 grains per fluid ounce is very considerably reduced. Wow. As it was in Britain, so was it across the Atlantic. In America, every pharmaceutical company was busy manufacturing cannabis-based patent cures. E.R. Squibb & Sons marketed their own chlorodyne and corn collodium. Park Davis turned out Utravol, Cassadine, and veterinary cannabis colic cure. Eli Lilly produced Dr. Brown's sedative tablets, Neurocene, and the one-day cough cure, a mixture of cannabis and balsam, which was a main competitor for another new cough cure released by the German pharmaceutical firm Bayer. It was trademarked Dresser and consisted of diacetylmorphine, more commonly known today as heroin. Okay, it was not only in tincture form that cannabis was available. Pills of hashish coated with sugar to sweeten the taste and prevent them from adhering to each other were widely sold as common painkillers, much as paracetamol might be today. A mixture of marijuana and tobacco, snuff, was on sale as an asthma cure, whilst in England in 1887, cannabis and Turkish tobacco cigarettes, in effect marijuana joints, were advertised in the Illustrated London News at 1s9d a pack. Oh, 1s9d a pack is how much they were. As in America, where they were manufactured by Grimault and Sons as Indian cigarettes. They too were promoted as an asthma and cough treatment, which could also dull facial pain and aid insomniacs. Although the range of cannabis medicines was wide, there were several fundamental problems with them all, which in some instances made doctors regard them with caution. The usual dose was between 1/4 and 1 grain, But it was all but impossible to judge an exact dosage because the strength of the medicines, even from bottle to bottle of the same brand, could vary greatly. This was due to the difficulties encountered in processing the cannabis used in them. The 1854 edition of the U.S. Dispensatory warned of the perceived dangers and consequences of overdosing, and it was not until 1900 that a method of assessing strength was devised. Another disadvantage was that cannabis was insoluble in water, which meant that it could only be eaten, not injected. Can't inject it. This resulted in the effects taking up to several hours to begin. When the hypodermic syringe was perfected by Dr. Alexander Wood of Edinburgh in 1853, opiates, which are water soluble, they are, were readily injected intravenously and became the painkillers upon which most doctors and surgeons relied. This in turn reduced cannabis popularity in the medical profession. You see? And look, you go to a hospital now still today. What are they going to put you on if you're in pain? You'll be immediately on morphine, some sort, unless you got an alert allergy to it, or it'll be on some kind of a opiate or opioid. Yeah, still. Water soluble. And good old cannabis is not. It's fat soluble, actually. So instead of water, it can actually be kind of dispersed in the fat. That's why butter, milk, cheese, those are perfect like bases in food for it. Because the THC, when you heat up that fat to a certain temperature with the pot in it, or the pot butter that you've already made that's in it now, that anyway, it gets activated. The THC gets activated at a certain temperature, and it becomes a part. It melds into the fat cells of the butter or of the milk or of the cheese. See, it's fat. So fat soluble, not water soluble. And that's one of the reasons why it stays in our bodies for so long in our fat cells. Because our fat in our bodies absorbs some of it. And it stays a while. And I would argue that is a beneficial staying a while. But we get punished for it now in our current society here still in this place I'm in, state of Kentucky. Drug testing everywhere. And it's crazy because so many jobs they have nothing to do with operating heavy machinery or driving or any of that. And they still require a fucking drug test. I'm sorry. It's ridiculous. So props to the states that have gotten rid of that draconian backwards crap and have moved into the future where hopefully the rest of the country will catch up to one day on that. Be nice. That would be nice. Okay. Talk about discrimination. That is a form of it. No, it's a choice that I smoke it or that I eat it or ingest it. But, what if I need that for medicine? Maybe that's my medicine. And I'd prefer that as my medicine or my sacrament to God Himself. And I would rather do that than have any other medicine or any other sacrament. And that would be the one. Why am I punished on that choice? When actually, that's a really wise choice. It's actually a really good choice compared to the other options of sacraments like wine. Come on. Yeah. And way better than any pharmaceutical as a medicine. I mean, come on, y'all. It's kind of ridiculous. Anyway, that's just my little rant on the end of that, and I'm going to put a little marker here. Where's my... Oh, yeah, shoot. I'll mark it. I gotta mark it. Yeah, dang on it. Here, I can do it with this. Right. So I hope y'all liked it, and we'll keep on going in the next one. But I don't want to make these over too much over an hour each. So, um, yeah, very interesting, huh? Okay, yep, that right there. Yeah, good old hypodermic needle. Kind of messed things up a little bit for old Cannabis as a up and coming medicine. That needle took over, and opium has already been established and was more known, and you know, it's almost like it got into our Western society a little earlier than cannabis, and cannabis didn't then have a chance. Once it showed up on the scene, it was, um, yeah, only certain people like O'Shaughnessy cared enough to really dive into it and see what was about. So thank you, O'Shaughnessy, for that, and thank you, Ludlow. Hope y'all liked it, and I'll see you in the next one. Hope it made you think, and maybe made you want to do your own research about some of this too, around this stuff. Go ahead, branch out. I encourage you to branch from any of this I mentioned, any person or any book or anything. So y'all have a good one. I'll see you in the next one.